is there's two primary streams of waking up Kundalini that I've discovered, that I've tracked in people. And one is through a technology that was designed to do this, like yoga or Tai Chi, or and then there's the other stream, which is the trauma stream. They have a traumatic event, a surgery, a death, an assault, and it launches them into the Kundalini awakening. So there are these two like major streams, contribution streams, that will have the potential to wake up a Kundalini energy. And we could talk about what that is, but of course that's Kali. And that's how she's described. It's in those Kali traditions. It's in the early goddess traditions where the concept Kundalini comes up, and Kundali is the goddess, Kundalini is the goddess, Chandi or Chamunda or Kali or Kalasam Karshani or Kubjika. These goddesses are all dancing this Kundalini dance.
Hi, Cynthia. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Derek.
So good to have you. Let's start with your journey. And I would love to know how you got here and who you are.
Yeah, that's always good to start with. Who are you? Who am I?
I'm still figuring it out myself.
That's a perennial question.
Yeah.
Yes, which me, what time, what point, when?
Yeah.
I am an author and an advocate for the goddess lineages and the divine feminine. I wrote a book called Embodying the Goddess that was just published this year, 2026. And in it, I talk about what the divine feminine is, the importance of curiosity. And really, I am deeply grounded in the longtime study of yoga, Tantra, Non-Duality, many of these traditions. I'm completing a master's right now to become better versed in some of the texts. So maybe even becoming a Sanskritist in that path. Because a lot of the texts that talk about the goddess are untranslated. And as we call her back into our world and into this time and this place globally, not just East, not just West, but globally, it's very useful and to me very important to have language to describe her that's rooted in history, that's not rooted in our conditioning or our patterns, but that can be pointed to.
Beautiful. Yeah, I wanted to just honor the goddess before we start the conversation. I forgot at the very beginning. My teacher, Josh, always says, Adi Mashakti Ki Jai, as either a invocation for her to be here with us and hear what we have to say. So I just wanted to take that quick moment and honor all the work that you've done in your path. I was reading about your path, and I would love to hear more about it and how you came to the goddess. My path, I was very connected to the more masculine, which I think is normal for a man. And then my mom died, and at some point the goddess came in really strongly at that point. So I would love to know more about how she came into your life, and was there a moment that you realized that she was calling you in? Yeah, just a little more about that would be great.
You know, I kind of found out that she was the one calling me in late in the game, in the sense that I had a very powerful Kundalini awakening when I was 24. And it launched me into direct path non-duality. I think that you're naming a major transition that happened for you, the death of your mother. And these transitions come to us and they change us. But it was 10 years before I realized that the Kundalini awakening was a she, and more than a she was a divinity. I understood immediately at about that 10-year mark why she had walked me blind for a decade. I'm a very analytical person. I overthink everything. And also I hope I can joke about this, but I have the tendency, like all of us, for my mind to gaslight me, right? Where my mind are we allowed to joke about that yet?
Of course, we can joke about anything.
You know,
Yeah.
where the
Laughter is
mind just
such a beautiful
constantly
part of the
goes, don't be
process.
crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't be crazy. I mean, to the point where, yeah, Kundalini awakening does make you think sometimes that you're going crazy. I'm not the only one that has taken myself to the hospital to ask what's happening to me, and having them tell me, yeah, you don't fit any of our markers, so go home. I actually work with people with Kundalini awakening, and this is a very common thing. But the goddess, when I realized it was her, it was very transformational. And she was a very specific she. She wasn't the goddess. She wasn't Mother Earth. And as a non-dualist, I understand that there's some potential, maybe, for tension. Of course, she has to be universal. Of course, she has to be the pattern of everything. Yes, she is. And when she comes to people, she comes very particular. So for me, it's Kali. That's who came to me. And as she has deepened in every way associated with those lineages and traditions that named and mapped her in that form. And at the same time, I know many other people who are connected to other goddesses, and just, having that tether, having that doorway, having that initiation into the particular / universal goddess, where she becomes both, paradoxically, as it must be. That is perhaps the path of our times. As I said, I work with people with Kundalini awakening, and these awakenings used to be very hard for people, like so hard, really agonizing. And in the last, say, 3 to 5 years, there's a tone that's changing. First of all, it's not so rare. Now I'm getting people reaching out to me a couple times a week, which is very common. And they're very grounded in who they are. They say, no, I really understand what this process is that's happening to me, but can you help me map the storyline, the pattern, the she of it, or the animal, or what is this initiation? There's a tone change that's happening. But the divine feminine, to me, she's waking up. I'd actually love to hear more about your story. What is it that you feel connected to in that way?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Kali because I sing every morning with the Shruti box, and I have a few songs, and I was thinking about our conversation today, and I sang a Kali mantra for quite a bit, and I was like, oh, I think Kali's coming in today. So I didn't know that's who you were connected to. So that's beautiful. My path has been it's had many chapters in it, let's say. And like you, I was connected to Krishnamurti, a spiritual teacher who is a very analytical spiritual teacher of, mind yoga, basically. And for 20 years, I was in that school of thought. And he quite often talked against many of the Indian traditions because he came from India, but he was raised in the West, and he felt that many of those traditions were not addressing the real issues that most people were carrying, was this psychological baggage around themselves. And when my mom died, I actually worked for the Krishnamurti Foundation for many, many years. And when she died, I left the foundation the same week that my mom died, after 16 years of service to this organization. And I put down all of Krishnamurti's work, and then I started to hear this other call. And that other call was from the goddess, was from many of the Indian traditions, Hanuman specifically, and Ganesh. So, yeah, it was so interesting to have this shift in my perspective where I'd spent so much of my time, of my life, in this analytical view. And it's changed my whole life. It's changed everything about who I am and how I move through the world, how I relate to the world. So I'm just so honored and grateful, grateful for that call. And so we're interviewing you. So I want to get back to you. Thank you for that question. That was very, very
Yeah.
beautiful.
I love
Yeah.
hearing, especially when somebody has a connection to a specific goddess. They're
Yeah.
all faces of one reality, but there's something very particular in each one. And
Absolutely.
I like that you bring up Krishnamurti also, because so many of our teachers in the modern time, let's say of the past 100 years, have dropped what we today call superstitious or faith-based spirituality, because to them science is more real. And so there's been this scientification of spirituality. And I do talk about that in my book, how this is a layer of reality. It is it is one of the layers that the goddess plays in, for sure. And what I find is if we stay with that layer, we tend to go back into what we may have previously labeled as superstitious, or had suspicion around something that was faith-based due to our own traumas. It's a trauma work. So it's like, well, we turned to the scientific perspective because that was the conduit that we could understand into the material. But in that process, we get to, if we keep our curiosity awake, we get to unpack what brought us the conditioning and the pain patterns in the first place. So many of us in the West have been indoctrinated to sit down, be quiet, don't ask questions, have faith, but I'm going to define faith for you. Faith means following what I say without curiosity, blindly. And so when we begin to challenge this shutting down of our curiosity, we have to turn toward things that make sense to our minds. Oh, I can lean on the physical world. Oh, I can go read a study about this thing or that thing. I always like to urge people to keep going, because what we're really trying to do in that is wake up our curiosity so profoundly that the faith comes back. But it's not a faith that we've been strong-armed into. It's not a faith that is extractive or based in transaction. You do this and therefore I'll do that. It's a faith based of becoming one with the pulsating whole of the heartbeat, breath beat, existence. And when we recognize that we are the heartbeat and that we are the pulsation, then to me, that's faith. Faith is the marriage of those. And then we can look at any language that wants to come in. You want to tell me about, plant medicine? Do you want to tell me about the goddess? Do you want to tell me about science? Do you want to tell me about physics? Do you want to tell me about it? Whatever the language is, when pulsation has met stillness and stillness has met pulsation, and we've stopped preferencing one over the other. And now that's the bone I have to pick with spirituality, is we have been locked in the transcendence bias for 2,500 years. 2,500 years we've been worshiping stillness and calling pulsation problematic, unreal, polluted. Different traditions call it different things. But the body is, in some traditions, dismissed as unreal, and in some traditions, treated with major shame. So, and mistrust. So it's very important that we remember what real faith is. It's the bringing back of pulsation and curiosity. to me, that's the language I was talking about in the beginning, to language the divine feminine. What is she? What is Kali? Kali is not one goddess. Only through the lens of modern orthodoxy has she become one goddess. But she started off in the earliest traditions as a constellation of goddesses, all named Kali. Many different names, many different traditions, but in her earliest stratum, she was considered the rays of the senses that reach out in space-time, not just time. Of course, we know Kala is time, but space-time, she's both. And at the center, you had the 13th Kali. She has 12 rays that reach out in all directions. And the one at the center, in some traditions, Kalasam Karshini, is described as the sun, and the sun is the void. So the void at the center, the point of stillness, radiates outward into pulsation. And they're the same, these 13 Kalis, but in different phases and holding different emanations. Other traditions have 17 Kalis, which is a lunar designation. There's 16 phases of the moon, with the 17th being at the center. But the point is that she is multiphasic and dynamic, and she is both the via negativa, if you know that term, of absolute nothing. No language can describe her. She is the no thing. She is the void. And equally, the via positiva, that which pulsates. And those earliest texts, especially in the Krama lineage, which is one of the early Kali worshipping lineages from the north of India, it went from Kashmiri, early Kashmiri traditions, pre-non-dual traditions, across to Assam, up through Nepal. This is where kind of like the Krama was really happening. But she was multiphasic and multiformed, the multiformity of the great goddess. And in that way, she got to be both. She got to be the stillness and the pulsation, which is what makes her such a good map. But then you have the patriarchal religions that say it's all an illusion and nothing is real and there's no actual ground of reality. And, in the West, those would be my ancestors, the Abrahamic Jewish patriarchy, and in the East, that would be Buddhism, the two great patriarchies of history.
Yes, you're speaking my language, girl. I'm interested how you think about non-duality in what you just presented as a very dynamic, vibrational expression of the goddess.
Yeah.
Because my understanding of non-duality and the lineages in India, the Shivite lineages, are a more masculine expression, right? So I'd love to hear how you think about non-duality in relationship to this very dynamic, pulsating goddess energy. Right? She is everything and she is nothing. I understand that part of it, but in relationship to your own view of non-duality, how would you talk about that?
Yeah, let's talk about non-duality. What is non-duality? Non-duality is described as not two. I am the totality of God, as it were, without separation. And that's the big distinction between monotheism and non-duality. In monotheism, God is separate. But you just mentioned Shaivism, and Shaivism has so many different forms. There's not one Shaivism. There's countless Shaivisms. And there are Shaivisms where, even tantric Shaivisms like Shaiva Siddhanta, where it's remarkably similar in a lot of ways to Christianity. There is a God. His name is Shiva. I cannot merge with Shiva. I can become like him. At the moment of death, I might achieve liberation to become like him. But there's a fundamental duality there in that tradition. And then you have other traditions, and my book is based on one of these traditions. So Embodying the Goddess is influenced by my favorite teacher of all time named Utpaladeva. He was a Tantra guru and teacher for, major tradition streams. And he lived in the 900s of the Common Era. And he just takes down other non-dualists. Because did you know that there are multiple non-dualities? And that might sound funny to some people. Some people might laugh at that. I've been in enough direct path non-duality, California non-duality. I was so deep in that for 15 years that if there was a teacher that taught from, say, 2005 to 2015, 2020, I was studying with them. My main teacher was Rupert Spira. I studied with him for 12 years. I know that dialogue. And I know that it is what they call direct path non-duality. Now, here's where it gets interesting. My dog does that sometimes.
Yeah, no problem.
Here's where it gets interesting, Derek. When I go into spiritual spaces, people tend to think there's only one non-duality. And they say something like, see that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are not your sensations, you are not your perceptions, you are not your memories. See that you are not that. Okay, that's great. We can do that. But then at a certain point, you've taken me from the bottom of the circle to the top of the circle, to liberation. Where's the second half of the circle? Take me from liberation back into my body. And when you start investigating non-duality, it has a lineage stream. Almost all modern non-duality teachers come out of a handful of Indian teachers that you can count on one hand. And most of those are Ramana Maharshi. So they say they don't have a lineage. They do have a lineage. They say it's the direct path, that there are no steps in the path. Of course, there are steps in the path. It might be a slim path. It might be a 1 or 2 step path. See that you are not, but it's still a path. Most religions are, on the other hand, what are called progressive paths. There's non-duality, and then there's the progressive path. The progressive path is there's checks and balances, there's a lineage, do not pass go until you get this thing down, and then you can go to the next thing, and this is, what most religion is progressive. Even in those non-dualities, because there are progressive non-dualities and direct path non-dualities, there are differences in philosophy. Now, the world doesn't exist, and there's fundamentally nothing happening. It's just spontaneously arising. And essentially, this is a dream. That's a Buddhist non-duality. In Buddhism, it's a mind-only model. It's not a religion, technically. It became multiple religions, but at its core, it's not a religion. It's a highly logical system. See that everything is a dream. And they call that non-duality. Then you have people like Utpaladeva, who is in argument with the Buddhists. So Tantra and Buddhism were borrowing from each other, appropriating each other, in dialogue with each other, arguing with each other. I mean, like high stakes arguing. Who gets the funding of the king? That matters. In the medieval period, so they're arguing with each other, and these are not low stakes arguments. So whose non-duality is right and whose is wrong? It's a hilarious conversation. But really what it comes down to is what's at the core. Now, we just said in Buddhism, it's nothing. Nothing's at the core. This is just arising spontaneously. There's no connection, in fact. between this now and any other now. There's just only this now, and it's arising spontaneously. Utpaladeva takes down those Buddhists on two main points, and I'll explain those. One point, I did not bring this up in my book, it gets too technical, but this I do teach from Utpaladeva's model, so hopefully it's infused. But on one point, he basically says, well, the Buddhists are right about pretty much everything to do with the layers of reality. But when it comes to the core, that the world is unreal, how could that possibly be? And what would even be your motivation for teaching if there is a fundamental and absolute non-reality to something? How could you so much as write a book or teach a person if there is absolutely nothing to teach and nothing arising? Your lineage has just been cut off at the head, and the entire lineage has just collapsed because there's nothing to teach and no reason to teach it. No reason to have students, no reason to debate, no reason to write books, no reason to, to carry on with what it is that you're trying to teach people, unless you get into the whole compassion thing, which is just honestly like a pretty weak sauce response to that. Because, just logic that through for a second. Compassion is just a very weak little argument for why to carry forward in this absolutist perspective. The second point is a word that Utpaladeva uses, which is chamatkara, which is delight, the absolute vibrational delight of being. And he says, no, this is not unreal. This is real. But this reality is what we call Shiva. It's God. It's not bodiless. The body is the divinity, and we are the divinity, and the divinity is pulsating, and the divinity is moving through us. And then he picks up the Kali traditions, as most of these Shaiva traditions do, and uses the Kali traditions to describe how consciousness is doing that, how it's vibrating forward. So Utpaladeva and then his grand student, Abhinavagupta, really maps that out. And so you have pulsation as the divinity now being the core of reality. This isn't at the core the void. And frankly, if it were the void, then we would all fall into what I call narcissistic nihilism. This like weird, semi-solipsistic, nothing is real, nothing exists. And I call that spiritual crisis. This is what I deal with people. Nothing exists, nothing is real. Well, hold on a second. That's not an ultimate truth. You're just passing under the gateless gate. You have to go through that. It's a phase. You absolutely have to go through the void. Now, I'm not teaching people who are first step spirituality. I'm teaching people who have had a transcendent experience. Now, what do I do with that? Because I have this teacher telling me that nothing is real. I'm sitting in that seminar, that workshop with that teacher who's saying that everything is a dream and everything is an illusion. But meanwhile, I have errands to run. I have kids to raise. I have a job to complete, and it's all for naught. And that's spiritual crisis. And we can move through it, but only by recognizing that pulsation is at the core of the void. It's not a no-thing void. If it were a no-thing void, then the whole fabric of reality would actually collapse. This reality couldn't exist, in fact. It's an illogical supposition that has been hammered into us. We've been indoctrinated. Now, we went from one indoctrination of a monotheistic God in the West to this other, those of us going into spirituality, to this other indoctrination. And the other one seems a lot more freeing because at least we're included. But then we realize, holy shit, it ends in the void. Maybe I shouldn't have sworn.
It's
Okay. And until we can go another step further and say, hey, I've seen the void. Most goddess worshiping people I know, the way that they have these conversations is something like, yeah, I know the void. I've touched the void. I've been to the void. But, and it's always that but, because that but says, yeah, cool, whatever, what of it? Who cares? That's not where the juice is. It's just walking under the gate. That's entering from one room to the other room. Now, while you're crossing that threshold, while your knee is up in the air and your foot has left the ground from the one room and your foot is going up and over that arc into the other room, you think you're dying. That's what the void is. It's death. You think you're dying. And you are terrified because you think that there's not even a room on the other side. You think you're picking your foot up and free falling into no thing, the void. But that's not what you're free falling into. You're stepping forward into pulsation. And that's what Shaivism, the traditions that I teach. And that's what Tantra is. Tantra has nothing to do with sex, has a lot to do with power, and it has everything to do with pulsation.
Beautiful. Wow.
I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I'm taking it in, girl, just feeling it all. I have to go back and re-listen to it, really. I thought it was amazing. I've always wondered about that because I've studied in both the goddess traditions and also the non-dualistic traditions, and Krishnamurti was very close to the non-dualistic traditions. And that's why I was so excited when the goddess came into my field. It added this thing that you're talking about that was missing, this vibrational, energetic, dynamic, where I had just always been focused on the void, always focused on that state of mind where there's nothing. And I never quite understood that there was a tantric view that included both sides of that.
Yeah.
Tantra
does include both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tantra
really
includes both. Absolutely. And this I do say in Embodying the Goddess, this I do say, but there's a state of consciousness beyond the void where you're standing in the void, but then you face back toward all of reality and saturate it. You saturate back into life, non-duality. Because if non-duality just hangs out in the void, that's biased non-duality. Abhinavagupta calls it a fake non-duality, an unreal non-duality, a not non-duality. He says, oh, all of those people, who even cares what they're saying? We're not even going to argue with them. They believe it. Someday they'll figure out that that's not the end of the path, but we don't even need to worry about those half non-dualists that call themselves Advaita Vedanta. He calls it a half non-duality because they haven't turned back to life and saturated life. Now, okay, there might be people who do that and there might be some, and I don't want to get anybody really mad because their teacher says this in a more complete way, but systematically, what is the system teaching? And I think that that's interesting. And we might even take one of Krishnamurti's most famous single one-liners, which is, when you teach a child the name of a bird, the child will never see the bird again, right? Now, what if the opposite were also true? When you name something, what is name but sound vibration? When you teach a child the name of the bird, everything becomes name and sound vibration. And that Shakti interpenetrates everything, and the child becomes the name of the bird, and the name of the bird becomes the child. And that's the tantric perspective. The tantric perspective is, hold on a second. Name is power.
Yeah, and for me, it also creates a deeper relationship with the thing you're relating to. So if I relate to a bird without name, I'm relating to the bird species. But if I relate to the blue jay, then all of a sudden I'm in deeper relationship with that specific entity. that's, part of existence. So I totally see that. It's really beautiful. I loved what you said about the circle and how it's only half the circle. Can you say a little bit more about that? I feel like
Yeah, it's
there was
huge.
something, there was something huge in that. And you said to unpack
Yeah.
that a little bit. Yeah.
Well, for the people who have studied a lot of spirituality and spiritual traditions, let's say you've done a lot of yoga, there's always like the end of the tradition. What does success look like? And in some traditions, that's called enlightenment or samadhi or nirodha or salvation. And all of those mean the same thing. You know, we could argue, but they really essentially mean the same thing. It's stillness, or at least it's a heaven state beyond form. Okay, we could like at least say that, right? It's a state of peace beyond form. In the yoga traditions, which takes this from Buddhism, and the Buddhism takes it from Jainism. So Jainism really is the founder of some of these ideas. From Jainism, you get the Buddha actually studied Jainism. He studied with some Jain ascetics and then appropriated a bunch of the Jain teachings, ahimsa, for example, into Buddhism. And then yoga comes after Buddhism. And yoga is essentially the working of Buddhism into a different frame, into a Vedic frame. So all of these traditions have something in common. You've got the end of the path being death, because Jainism takes the problem of karma. Well, if every seed sown creates an action, and it does something really elegant, it says, I'm going to stop acting altogether. I'm not going to wear, in some sects that are a little bit more severe, I'm not even going to wear clothes. So if I go into absolute stillness, then the karmic wheel has to grind itself to a stop. It may not address past karmas, but it'll certainly address the accruing of new karmas. And in those traditions, for the first time, really in these models, you have the concept of yogic suicide, where practitioners have and you have to get the permission of your teacher. You can't just like go do this. This is a very high level teaching where you've so stopped the wheel of karma and you've so thoroughly addressed it in your being that you stop eating or stop breathing. Some practitioners teach themselves to stop breathing. That gets translated into Buddhism. What is Buddhism at its core? It's a death and dying practice. It's a death and dying practice. What do you do at the moment of death? And how do you meet your death? Truly. It's so beautiful. It's a beautiful system, or series of systems, I should say, because there's about 100 different Buddhisms and each one is totally distinct and different. But essentially, where they dovetail and where they meet is that most of them are death and dying systems. I'm not going to say all because there's probably Buddhisms out there that I don't know of, but most of them are death and dying systems. So much so that the really accomplished Buddhist masters die in celebrated ways, like seated in meditation. It's really, really special to have a teacher that can die standing up. Like that's a skill level. Or that can die and then work on the other side and dismantling the elements of their body through the rainbow body. So, and that is work to dismantle your elements to that degree. In yoga, it's called Mahasamadhi. In yoga, you go to a state of dissolution where you go from the bottom. This is me, my suffering little me, my little Cynthia, who like has to have her coffee in the morning. And, my daughter drove for the first freaking time today. And I'm sitting there in the car and she's going over the double yellow line and I'm like panicking and I'm not trying not to say anything. And like, there's that Cynthia, right? I am fully formed in that world. Like, we're good, And then there's the Cynthia that kind of goes up the circle and, oh, you're not this and you're not that and you're not your thoughts. And it's all appearing in the moment. And then I can get myself to that place. Now, if I were really accomplished, I would get so deep into that place that I would take Mahasamadhi. I would die. I would release my body. And that's what some of the great saints do. And that's what we applaud in some of the great saints. Oh, they took Mahasamadhi. And we kind of like elbow each other and we're like, well, that's serious accomplishment. Like, that's pretty cool. Right. And that's the top of the circle. Now, some teachers keep going. They touch that point of absolute saturation as God. Oh, everything, that's me. I'm God. Everything is me. Like, not as a person, but like, this is just the unfolding of God happening. And it happens to be happening through my heart. Wow, that's cool, right? And they keep going, because to have a body is exactly as sacred as to not have a body. Now, most of my friends who are, let's say, divine feminine non-dualists, I ask them this question: do you remember in a past life taking Mahasamadhi and thinking that was it for you, that you weren't coming back? And the answer is yes. Yep, totally remember that. And I'm like, yeah, me too. I really was like, I meditated the shit out of it, like I left. And I thought for sure I wasn't coming back. And then here I am. So because you have to complete the circle. You have to complete the circle. Is there a bias? Are you carrying a bias? And does your bias on any level of your being say that life is less good than not life? Pulsation is less than stillness, because they're the same thing. They're the same thing. And we have this opportunity not just to stay on the circle, but then to deepen it, and it becomes a spiral. And then you go around and around and around. And that allows me to be the neurotic mother in the car, because I can do that. And then I can also, have moments of such profound beauty that it's all pouring through, and I am the goddess. And she's looking through my eyes and touching through my skin. And it happens in flashes, and it's, oh yeah, there's that too. It's both. And one isn't more better than the other.
I always love the visualization of the spiral, such a powerful geometric image to represent so many of these teachings. Everyone, it's not it's not like whoop, it's really this spiral. It's really beautiful. I'd love to hear more about your Kundalini experience. What was the physical manifestation of what you experienced, and how did you react? Did you know it was happening, or did you have to investigate? Did you look for help? Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. All of the above. I had been a longtime yoga practitioner already. And it turns out yoga is a technology designed to wake up Kundalini energy. So is acupuncture. So is there's two primary streams of waking up Kundalini that I've discovered, that I've tracked in people, and one is through a technology that was designed to do this, like yoga or Tai Chi or Reiki. And then there's the other stream, which is the trauma stream. They have a traumatic event, a surgery, a death, an assault, and it launches them into the Kundalini awakening. So there are these two like major streams, contribution streams, that will that have the potential to wake up a Kundalini energy. And we could talk about what that is, but of course that's Kali. And that's how she's described. It's in those Kali traditions. It's in the early goddess traditions where the concept Kundalini comes up, and Kundali is the goddess, Kundalini is the goddess, Chandi or Chamunda or Kali or Kalasam Karshani or Kubjika. These goddesses are all dancing this Kundalini dance. By the way, the first The first description of Kundalini has her not at the base of the spine. Usually we think of Kundalini as at the base of the spine, coiled, snake coiled 3.5 times with her mouth pointing up. And if you do the right, whatever, come to my Kundalini Awakening workshop for $444 and I will strike your Kundalini and she will shoot up your spine. It's like that, right? You do things just right and that's not how she's described. She's described as a sprout in the heart, or the coiled one in the heart, or the spiral. But the coiled one, the sprout, the spiral in the heart, that emanates out and then returns back again. That's how
Beautiful.
she's described in the earliest stratum, in the Nishwasa stratum of Tantra. And so for me, I had a transcendent experience when I was 12. A total dissolving void experience where I saw that everything was God, kind of more of a straight, direct path, non-dual recognition. When I was 24, after all these years of practicing yoga, my husband and I had just gotten married and we moved to Santa Barbara. And it's almost like I locked in my grounding pad because my husband is so grounded. And then the lightning struck and I changed entirely from the person he had just married. I was like launched into spiritual crisis. I was like, lightning pad, perfect. I have you locked in. But that's really what happened. The Kundalini, I opened up a non-duality book and I read about a paragraph and my vision changed and I started shaking and trembling. He came home and we connected in deep intimacy. And the energy just became this rushing river that swallowed me entirely. And I was launched from that experience into such a thorough breaking down of the dam that I was in a near constant mystical state for over 2 years. And it wasn't until I birthed my first child that I came crashing back to earth, so to speak. It wasn't a pleasant experience. It was whiplash because I had been such a non-dualist and there was this tension between non-duality, what I was learning as non-duality, and motherhood. And they seemed to not play well with each other in the yard. Of course, now I know they do, but at the time it didn't feel that way. So that was my path, and I'm stubborn and I'm like clearly not very bright because she has to give me the lesson in the hardest possible way. She's not like, really 20 years later and now like she only has to yell at me rather loud for me to understand the lesson. But it used to be she had to like crash my world and shatter it to pieces for me to pay attention catastrophically. Yeah, I think I'm just not a very bright recipient. I'm like, la, 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 that's not really happening. So now I know when something needs to shift or change and how it needs to shift or change. May I always listen better. May I know what those next paths are more intuitively, more silently, with a little less of the banging of the pots and the pans. But she's not subtle. And I'd love to hear from you and actually even your listeners, because she's not subtle. Like when the goddess starts coming into your life, it's not like, I wonder what that is. It's not, it is the least subtle. It's almost like if you were to write it down, anybody reading that narrative would be like, okay, that's a nice little piece of extremist fiction, like that's like, so I'd love to hear your take too on that.
Yeah, she's not subtle at all. I have one of my teachers in a plant ceremony, she'll invoke Kali, usually the last night. And when she comes into the space, her instruction is always to feed her your deepest, darkest suffering, the thing that is most weighing on your heart. And it's always the most active moment in the ceremony because people are offering their shame and their guilt and their unworthiness and, you know, whatever it is they're carrying. And it's palpable, right? It's a moment where there's true honesty in relationship to the goddess. And what I've learned is that the goddess, she wants our prayers and our songs and our mantras and our devotion, but she can also carry those things inside of us that are most painful. And she can help release them, and she'll actually eat them. You know, it's a devotion, it's a offering. I'm offering my shame, I'm offering my feeling of unworthiness, whatever it is, right? It's such a beautiful gift to give to her those things that we struggle with most. And so that's where I've been in most relationship with her in a powerful way, besides singing to her and, you know, making offerings to her on my altar. But yeah, you're right. She comes in and she'll deconstruct your whole life if that's what she needs to do.
And often
Because that's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
we all need to be deconstructed at some point. Yeah. I would love to hear more. You wrote this amazing book, which now I'm really interested to read, so I want to get it. But I would love to know what inspired you to write that book. What was
Much
the
Paladeva.
yeah? What was the
Yeah. Reading sacred text, because the sacred texts transmit. And unless you plan on becoming, you know, a Sanskritist, and by the way, people who study these texts often become teachers because the texts transmit. Problematic when they think they're the ones transmitting and not the text. That's where it gets dicey. But the texts transmit. And studying the texts, that's what I'm in service to. I'm a devotee. And if I can be a devotee, and for my fellow, let's say, like Western uh, audience of people who want embodiment and want their spirituality to reflect them and want agency, sovereignty, then here I am reading texts that say those things. And don't we want to know that there is sacred tradition out there that speaks to these things that we're looking for today? It's not just thou shalt this and thou shalt not that. And, you know, it's more than that. We have so many more options. We don't have one great book out there of sacred. We have thousands. And even in the yoga world, and I led yoga teacher trainings for 10 years. I'm just wrapping up my last one now. I'm taking a pause. And the texts that I teach in yoga teacher training, even those are selected. So what about the other texts? What about the texts where the goddess herself is speaking? Most of them are not translated. And what do they have to say to me? So that's what I want to start doing, is just kind of like putting in, and I have 14 final copies of this book because it started off too technical. And now it's as plain, straightforward English. There's a little bit of psychology in there. There's a little bit of mythology in there. There's a little bit of, you know, but really it's how can I be a devotee to these texts, to the text, to the sacred text that is transmitting, and then offer it in some small way to somebody who is interested and does want this, and in a way that speaks it to them in plain English, because Sanskrit is not an easy language to learn and understand. And then even when you know Sanskrit, and I don't, let's just be straight. Like I may have finished the grammar books, but that doesn't mean anything, right? It means nothing. It means actually nothing. I mean, it means nothing. So, but each text is technical. And so the Krama tradition that I teach, if there are words for something, those words mean something very specific. And this drives scholars crazy because we'll sit there in our yoga classes and we'll be like, well, there's like 18 different definitions for this word. So you can apply any one of those definitions to the word, and it means all of them. We have this like romanticization where there's this many pages that define the word yoga. So all of them are real and all of them are true. And that's just not true. Each text has its own definition. It's like, the word cool 100 years ago meant something very technical. Nowadays, it might mean something else very technical, but it doesn't mean both of those things. I can't apply my word of like, oh, that's so cool to 100 years ago. That doesn't make logical sense. And yet we do that in our study of the sacred text. We're like, well, what this word could mean if I look at all the definitions in the dictionary, but it's not like that. And so when you fall in love with these texts and these traditions, you have to go into them and try to love them from the inside. And I guess I'm a devotee. I used to say I'm an academic, but I'm really not. I'm only an academic in service of devotion. I could care less, really. It's like, can I go so deep into this text and then maybe explain it in such a way that my friend could like understand, or at least give them a framework that when they think they're going crazy, I can be like, hey, no, you're not going crazy. There's a whole tradition out there that not only maps this, but guess what? It's like the source tradition that most of us are referring to. We just don't know it when we're talking about, spirituality. It's embedded in there. So let's pull on those threads and see what happens. And I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep talking about texts. Probably the Kali texts. I suspect.
Love them from the inside. That was a beautiful statement. Do you have a devotional practice? And if you do, what does it look like?
Yes, I do. I'm initiated into a lineage, a goddess lineage, and I do practice. I'm ritual curious. I love ritual, and I take time out of my day for ritual in the method and means taught to me by my teacher. But I'm so ritual curious that like if somebody's holding a ritual workshop, I will happily go to that ritual workshop and see what you're doing. Because to me, that's just as cool. Right now, I recently went to a workshop, a ritual workshop on creating your own ritual. And here in coastal California, at this point in time, the white sage is blooming. And this teacher brought in all this white sage and feathers and seashells and walked us through this really beautiful ritual that felt very localized in my very specific town. And we don't really have time to get into this here, but we have 3 major streams in this body. We are encoded to our ancestors. So we have ancestral memory, ancestral pattern, ancestral trauma, all of the above. And our rituals might want to be pulled from there. We also have our embodiment. So we're encoded, we're embodied, and we're embedded. Our embodiment is karmic record, soul record. Now we might I happen to pull most of my rituals out of that stream, what my records tell me and what those traditions share with me. But we're also embedded in this place, in this time. What does the land under my feet have to share with me about its rituals? Because I guarantee you, there have been people ritualizing in this place and this time. And where we live, the culture around us, the politics around us, that embeds us. And there's rituals we can do that speak to that. So I'm a hyper ritualist, and I'll say yes to any one of those three streams. If my ancestors did a ritual, and they did, I actually I know very particularly what my ancestors did. There's a mystic in my ancestry. I do talk about him in my book. His name is Abraham Abulafia, and he had an entire meditation method in very early Kabbalah. So I can like read a book. Most people can't do that, but most people at least understand, this is my genetic stream, and you can look into that, and there might be rituals there for you. You can feel into your soul record and do rituals there. And you can also show up on the land where you live, in the culture in which you live. And for some of my friends, that actually means going to church, you know? So truly the culture that you live in. Yeah. What about you? Do you have any rituals?
I do. Can you just name those three once real quick again? Because I think that was
Yeah,
a
I have a
really
Substack
important point.
article. I have a
Beautiful.
Substack article on it and a YouTube video. We are encoded to our ancestry, embodied, soul come into body, soul record, really Akashic record come into body, and we are embedded. Encoded, embodied, embedded. We are
that.
embedded in this place, culture, time, land.
Love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would love to link to that article in the show notes so people can
Okay.
check it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Because, it matters, because we're pointing our fingers out there at people and saying, well, you're not allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that. And who's to say? Now, is it ethical what you're doing? Please do develop your ethics. And you absolutely must. And where is this connecting to you? Is it connecting to you through your encoding? Is it connecting to you through your embodying? Is it connecting to you through where you are embedded in that current place and time, right? And once we know that, we can be a little less judgmental towards ourselves and others, and we can also have more reverence and really do it right. Now, if I am in an embedded ritual where somebody on this land tells me, no, this is the way you do this ritual, you better believe I'm going to do it that way. And I will ask people, hey, if you're native in this land, is there a way that you wish, this is where curiosity really comes in. What is it that you wish to see here? We have to listen to each other. So it does both of those things. It makes us more responsible, but it also makes us a lot more open.
Yeah, and it speaks to three very important parts of who we are, our ancestry, where we are, and what we're practicing. So it's a very holistic view. I just caught that and I was like, wow, that's really good. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, it used to be that we didn't have to think about those as three different things. People just did what their land, ancestry / tradition said. Those three were one thing. But nowadays, most people I know don't have that. So figure those as three things. Each one is
Yeah,
worthy.
absolutely. So you work with people that have gone through an experience. Can you say a little bit more about that in case somebody listening is like, oh, this thing happened to me and I need somebody to talk to?
Yeah. Yeah. I do that, and I would never charge for that.
Oh,
And find somebody who's not going to shame you. If somebody's talking about entities, run. That's a fear-based system, and it's not non-dualistic. So there's a lot of people trying to manipulate the spiritual experience and gain power from it. But start reading sacred texts, find teachers, and honestly, find a therapist. We need therapy if we're privileged
yes.
enough to have access to that. And hopefully we have some access to that. I do recognize that for some people we don't have access. But yeah, you can reach out to me. I'm on all the channels. And read Embodying the Goddess. It really is a map. It's a map. I didn't come up with the map. Utpaladeva came up with It's a map, and it really does help. So at this point, I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll read this and we can talk. It's both, because we can get stuck in different layers of our being. Um, and that's what the map is. The map is like, are you stuck in the mountain pass? Are you stuck in the river? Are so which layer of reality are you stuck on? Are you stuck in this layer of the heart, the thought emotion layer? Are you stuck in the intuition layer? Are you stuck in the physical layer? It's like it maps you, and it places you. I probably wrote the book just to like give myself a break and be like, here's a good map. I can't walk the map for you. You have to be your own adventure. But at least here you go. Here's the map. It's pretty
Great.
thorough. It's a good topography.
Yeah, you're good at maps. I can tell that.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to share? Maybe where people can find you, where they can find your book, any parting beautiful advice that you've given this whole podcast. So, yeah,
I I'm on social media, Embodying the Goddess book. I have a website, CynthiaAbulafia.com. I'll share all of that with you. And I am doing more and more now. So I am focusing more on offerings and events and things like that. And yeah, yeah, I'm out there.
awesome. Thank you so much for a beautiful interview. Always love to talk about the goddess, and many blessings to your book as it enters the audience and to your work. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.